Mm.
Let folks log in, give them a minute or two. All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jessica from Greenlight and we are thrilled to host tonight's event with Jason Reynolds and Danica Novgorodoff presenting their new graphic novel, Long Way Down. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Jason, Danica, and the team at Athenium for making all this happen, and to you guys for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces right now, our community of authors and readers is still here. So we're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversations like this. So a couple little housekeeping things before we get started. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see and hear you. But they can see that you're here, and you can see a count of fellow attendees at the top of your Zoom screen if you want to check there. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat throughout the event. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find that by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We're going to be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our social media channels later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Long Way Down, is available for sale at Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person at our bookstore locations 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day of the week. And you can purchase Jason and Danica's book and many others on site at the store, or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat a little later on. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. So now a couple introductions. Jason Reynolds is the 2020-21 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature and the author previously of many books, including When I Was the Greatest, The Boy in the Black Suit, the Track series, and Long Way Down, which received a Newbery Honor, a Prince Honor, and a Coretta Scott King Honor. Danica Novgorodoff's previous graphic novels include The Slow Storm, Refresh, Refresh, and The Undertaking of Lily Chin. She's received many awards, including a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Literature, and her art and writing have been published in MoMA Magazine, Best American Comics, and many others. So their new edition of Long Way Down is a gripping and galvanizing graphic novel that combines Jason's electrifying poetry with Danica's haunting artwork. So you're in for something really special tonight. Jason and Danica are going to start us off with a visual reading from the book, and then I'll have the kind of terrifying privilege of interviewing them, and they're going to take your questions after that. So Jason and Danica, please take it away.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jason, by the way. Though I should have said I'm Danica. I should have started out with good evening, everyone. My name is Danica. And so what we're going to do is we're going to show you just a few stills of Danica's beautiful artwork. I need to say before we get started that I'm honored and it is humbling to have had the opportunity to collaborate. And I use collaborate loosely, really to be lucky enough that Danica decided to take on this task, this project, and rendered these words into something completely beyond my wildest imagination. So we're going to show you a few of those slides. I'm going to read some of the pieces that are on those pages, and then we'll jump into the interview.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Greenlight, for hosting us, and thanks to Jason for this incredible book. And so here, this is, let me share my screen, and so you can see some of these pages. Well, this is the cover. And then I'm gonna, all right, we're gonna start at the beginning.
At the beginning. This story is true. It happened to me. My name is William Holloman, but to my friends and people who know me, just Will. This is a little further in, right when the shooting happens. I'll read the whole piece and it'll bleed into this. And then there were shots, and everybody ran, ducked, hid, tucked themselves tight, did what we've all been trained to, pressed our lips to the pavement and prayed the boom followed by the buzz of a bullet ain't meet us. Me and Tony waited like we always do for the rumble to stop, before picking our heads up to count the bodies. This time, there was only one. And my favorite page of Danica's version of this book is the page with the earthquake. I'm sure you all remember what it looks like in the actual book, where it's all kind of spread out. And so this is just amazing. I've never been in an earthquake. Don't know if this was even close to how they are, but the ground definitely felt like it opened up and ate me. Jessica's coming back? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm back. Thank you guys for showing that. I've been living with the graphic novel for the last few days, and it's so amazing to see the poetry and the art come together. So I wanted to start off asking a little bit about how that collaboration worked, and just ask how collaborative was this process of adapting a novel into a graphic novel? What did you guys talk about before it happened, during the process, after the art was already created? How did that process work?
Nothing. Nothing. You know what? Here's the thing. Here's what I'll say, because I've been going through this. There are other parts of my life where these words are being adapted, right? So like the stage play happened, and there's movie. I just got off a call with the movie people about the movie of this book happening, and so my rule has always been, when it comes to collaboration, that you trust your collaborator. Right, whoever it is that you choose and that you decide to work with, you trust that person, and you trust their vision, you trust their ability, their talent, their taste. If not, what exactly are you working with them for, right? and so you know, I feel really fortunate that, first of all, I went. We were gonna. It was always the plan to do a graphic novel. So first of all, I want people to know that. When I signed the deal for Long Way Down, after they read the novel and we got it all squared away, they said, we're going to double down and we're going to do this 2 ways. We're going to do a novel in verse, and we're going to do the graphic novel a couple years down the line. That was always the plan. When it came down to picking artists, I was very particular, because I'm very particular about everything in my life, especially as it pertains to my work. And I wanted this book to be fine art. I wanted to push the limits and the boundaries of what a graphic novel could be, or the way that we think about graphic novels in America, because around the world, graphic novels are all kinds of beautiful things. But I wanted to like figure out ways to challenge that. And I wanted to work with someone who could embody the ghostliness and that weird sort of liminal space that the book kind of lives in. And so when they showed me Danica's work, it was immediate. There were 3 artists. And when they showed me Danica's work, I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I want. It feels fresh. It feels it feels like she's pushing something. There's watercolor, and there's no hard lines, which was amazing for me. I was like, this is, because I'm so used to like the cells, right? Like the hard black cells, and you know, and like the most creative thing that sometimes I find that my buddies do when it comes to like the cells on a graphic novel is like have an extended image that goes beyond one cell and into the other cell. And it's like, I need a little more than that. I need, like, you know what I mean, to play around with the page and composition. And so for me, it was like, Danica is the one. And once that decision was made, and once she signed on and said, I'm down to do this, you know, with you, that was it. I was like, all right, well, I talk to you when it's over. Like, I mean, that was it.
Wow. So Danica, what were some of your first impressions of the novel? How did you imagine translating it into a graphic novel?
Well, it's funny that Jason was talking about, you know, how the art samples that he saw and that the editors were looking at originally of my work were these kind of fine art watercolor paintings that I had done for kind of a different experimental project, and they weren't part of any kind of graphic novel project. So when they approached me with those images and they were like, we want this book to look like that, I was like, how do I do that in a graphic novel form? Like, I know I made these images and I've made graphic novels, but like, how do I mix the two? Because those like kind of ethereal, ghostly watercolors are not, they're not narrative, they're not explicitly narrative. Like, you can't tell who's who, and there are so many characters in Long Way Down, and you have to know who's who at all times, and what the story is and what's happening, and like, you know, so there's a lot of very specific narrative that has to be going on. And it took me a while to figure out how to make my kind of more fine art style work with the graphic novel. And even though Jason and I didn't really talk about it while I was working on it, I would say that the editors and the art director like put me through the ringer a little bit, kind of challenging me to like really push it and make it look both you know, both like I'm telling this specific story and make it kind of yeah, more like my watercolor paintings, like so
That
it was,
makes me happy. I'm glad they stuck it to you. I'm glad. It makes me happy to know that my editors, they know me, right? They know like, yo, this kid, he I just don't know if it's worth doing anything if we can't try to make it something fresh.
yeah, sure.
So what did you
You know?
think when you first saw it? What did you think about the novel?
I st-
Do you feel like it? I mean, and this is the thing I keep thinking about because I read the novel and then I read the graphic novel like in quick succession. What do you feel like the graphic novel brings out, like, or adds to the novel? Like when you saw it, what was new to you?
Oh, I think that it becomes even more the intensity of it all, but also not just the intensity. I think the moments that are softer and that are a bit more sensitive and compassionate and are quieter, I think those moments are what's elevated more than anything. Because writing tension in a book like this in verse isn't that hard to do, right? So like because you can just use one word on a page or two words on a page, and it'll just like tighten the emotional space of a narrative. Or you can list out like all the different names of a pistol or of a gun, or there are devices that you can use to really kind of suck the moisture out of a moment, right? And to make something seem acidic by using language. But the softer moments in verse become a little bit more difficult to do. Now in prose, writing a softer moment is easy, right? Because you have so much space, there's mattress there for you to play around on. But in verse, it becomes a little more, it takes a bit more of a deft hand to do it. And the illustrations of like, you know, when Will is hugging his father, to see it, right? Because I describe it, but to see it in the book, it's one of my favorite scenes. Or Will and Sean as young people looking each other in the face. My favorite spread in the book is like it's just the two of them, like their faces, young faces, looking at each other, right? And it's like that because you can't see that in the text, right? Those moments when you're writing in verse, you have to pick which moments you're going to sacrifice because you don't have all of the words, right? And so which moments are you going to leave to the reader to do a little work for themselves? And a lot of those moments were the moments I had to kind of delete to let the book keep moving and to keep the verse tight, that she was able to really push to the forefront so beautifully.
I feel like those quiet moments are sort of my specialty. I'm like, you know, both in writing and in art, I struggle more to make those really dramatic moments. The quiet moments are like, my agent is always like, I don't know, it's a little too quiet. Like no one's gonna, there's no drama.
There's actually some folks asking in the chat if we can show those pages. So I have to ask you, Jason, if this is the spread that you're talking about, or if it's earlier in the book.
It's earlier.
Okay, like when they're young.
Earlier.
Danica, you probably recognize it.
It's like the whole spread. They're just looking at it.
This one.
Yep. I love it. I love it. You know, there's something, I mean, I have brothers, right? And so there's something about that, and it's so simple, but you don't really get to see that in the book, you know, and in the text version, the first novel in verse. And even the scene where he's killed, Danica made a decision, a brilliant decision, right? Because in the book, it's like his mom hangs over him like a light post or whatever. Like she hangs over him, right? Danica's version, Danica chose to have his mother holding him as he's sort of bleeding out, right? That's a moment that is really painful, but that shows a kind of sensitivity by showing a mother holding a child that the book doesn't even describe it that way. And I thought it was a brilliant call on Danica's part to show like the intimacy of a mom holding a child as she's losing him, that I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, so what other kinds of decisions got made about what to leave out and what to put in, and who makes those decisions?
Danica makes the decision.
Well, I did the adaptation of the novel into a script first. So yeah, I mean, basically I chose the obvious thing to do was to take anything that was described visually in text and I could kind of take those moments out and show it in images rather than text. Like if it was a visual description of somebody or even of action happening, I could just show it happening instead of including the text. And beyond that, I just kept like every favorite moment of mine. And then, I probably kept at least half the text. But yeah, it has to be distilled down pretty far just to fit it all into a graphic novel.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the novel itself is like kind of spare. And I mean, the poetry is obviously like a defining feature of the novel itself. So I wondered if adapting a novel in poetry was a different kind of process or an easier process than adapting some other kind of story.
Oh, it was so easy because the novel is so perfect to begin with. And so it wasn't like I had to make, it was just, yeah, it's all so concise and so beautiful and so perfect to begin with that it's, that's the easy part for me. And then there's like the long slog of like drawing the sketches for every single page. But and then the watercolors and inks were my favorite part of the drawing process, because then I was like, okay, I have all the faces drawn, and then I just kind of go freely with the watercolors and the inks. So
You know what? Another one of my favorite spreads. I just thought about it. Sorry, it's another one of my favorite pages is when she just draws out the neighborhood map. Brilliant. And I hate maps. I'm a person who does not. I hate maps in books. That's like a thing. And anybody who knows me, all my friends who write fantasy, they know that I have a thing about like, I hate when they put maps in their books because I think it ruins like the imagination of the reader who is supposed to be living in this world. I just hate it. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I love that she put a map of the neighborhood and that the map looks like
Here
there
it
it is.
Yeah.
I love this. And I love that it's not like, it almost feels like it's obviously done with some care, but it's not like one of these, it doesn't have I don't know what you would call it, all of the quote unquote beauty of some of the images in the book. It's like, no, this is a map of the community and it's beautiful, but it's like, this is an overhead shot and a map of this particular neighborhood, and that she only shows the things that need to be seen, right? So you don't get to see, like these kids live in a city and it's sparse. And I thought it was brilliant to show just the important things, the abandoned parking lot, a corner store, right? Like a Baptist church, the Catholic church, the pharmacy, like it's just really just the car wash, the Caribbean bakery, right? Stuff that I never thought about, but that I would have thought about if this were a prose novel.
Right. And it's serving a narrative purpose too. It's like those blocks become panels of text to like move the story along at the same time. That is a really great spread. So yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it. It actually, when I found out that Danica was the one doing the adaptation of this novel, it made a lot of sense to me because I really liked some of your previous graphic novels, and I was thinking about Refresh. And that's a novel it's about war, but it's about violence and masculinity in a similar way to this novel. I mean, it's a very different kind of story, but there's that sort of push and pull of like violence and tenderness in men's relationships with each other and in families' relationships with each other. So I wonder if you do you feel like that's a thread that runs through your work, or is it just a coincidence that you worked on those two different stories?
Yeah, I don't know. The themes of violence and masculinity are very interesting to me. Why is that? I don't know. I think it's like, I guess it's about sort of the outward expression of internal pain and psychological and emotional struggle, and how that violence and pain kind of goes hand in hand with like a very deep love. And like in Refresh, it's the boys' love for their fathers and the absence of their fathers that drives them to act out their pain through these physical acts of violence. And then in Long Way Down, it's like the whole premise of this book is losing someone that you love so much and you can't bear to lose them, and then feeling the need to try to fix that through violence or revenge. And that's like maybe not such a great way to fix anything, but yeah, I don't know. I think like it kind of makes me think of the Elena Ferrante Neapolitan novels, and how her novels are told from a woman's perspective, and they have so much violence in them. And I've heard so many people say, like, speculate, was that really written by a woman, or, I mean, now we know it is, but, or like, are they realistic? And I think they felt so true to me. And like, obviously male violence has an enormous impact on women's lives. So I think, masculine stories don't hold a monopoly on violent themes. But yeah, so if I were to ask for a sequel of Long Way Down, I think I'd want to know, like, what's Danny's story and what's Will's mom's story. So I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jason, do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, we're talking a lot about like the craft of the book, but talking about some of the themes of the book, about how violence and masculinity and love and family kind of intersect together, and how that plays out in poetry, and how that plays out in art.
Yes, it's my job is to always complicate the argument, right? As a writer, to avoid cliche, one must complicate the argument. And so I think about masculinity often as a man, obviously, as a male, and who identifies as male. I think about masculinity in my own life in all ways, because there is poison there, but there's context that we don't ever talk about when we talk about the poisonous version of masculinity. And this book is meant to contextualize. So like, just like Danica just did too, to talk about like, well, where is it coming from? What does it mean? I mean, if you are, and this is the way, because I am a Black person, and that is such a big part of our identity in this particular country, it is impossible for me to not contextualize some of these things around what that means if you were to track it back hundreds of years, right? And what that means, if you were to track it back, is or even 60, 70 years, if my grandfather was vulnerable or emotional, his entire family is in danger, right? So we don't think about it this way. What we say is we like to make it neat, because it's easier for us to sort of wrestle, or for us to at least like write it all off, or figure out ways to like put it in a certain category. But the truth is that my grandfather was a hard man because that hardness kept his children safe. Unfortunately, that hardness also complicated his children's lives, right? And that's the double-edged sword of surviving within a certain framework in this particular country. So when you look at these kids, like a kid like Will and a kid like Sean and all the kids in this book, what we typically say is these are ghetto gangster children, right? And it's easy for us, once we call them that, it's easy for us to write them off, to put them into a category. These are kids torn up by toxic masculinity. Let's put them over. When the reality is, these are children who are afraid, children who know that if I don't move a certain way, my life can be over. But if I do move that way, my life could be over. And I don't know which way is the right way to go. My back is against the wall. Will is not a gangster. He is not a monster. He is a child. He is afraid. He has never held a gun. But he's also used to death. What do you say to that child? You don't blame that child for not having what we've never given him, right? But that's what we do. That's the easiest thing to do. And so like I always want to think about masculinity and boyhood and childhood in ways that make it uncomfortable for adults, that keep us in the hot seat, because we let ourselves off the hook when really it's our fault that we failed them, right? It's our fault. But we let ourselves off the hook by calling them names and categorizing them, sending them into the penal system, all the things. And that's what Long Way Down is wrestling with. Like, that's what Long Way Down is about.
Right. All this generational trauma it's not about this one character. And I mean, and the book and the graphic novel both do that. It starts with this one character in the elevator, and it builds and builds and builds and builds, so that you see all of this context. So, I mean, yeah. Okay. So now that we're talking about the heavy stuff, what was the experience like of working together as a Black writer and a white artist, and talking about the story that is so much about race, about communities of color? Like, what did you guys both think about in that process?
Can you repeat the question? You broke up a little bit on my end.
Sorry. What was it like working together as a Black writer and a white artist? And did you think about that, or did that matter in this story that's so much about this community of color?
So for me, I'll say this, for me, there's always a pressure there for me. So when it was time to pick an artist, you know, my initial thought is always like, let me try to find a Black artist, just because, one, because Black artists need work. You know what I mean? Like, let me try to find somebody who nobody knows and give them some work. And two, because there's always that feeling of like, well, this person will be able to represent what I'm trying. They'll be able to. We assume they'll be able to get what I'm trying to say. That's always my first sort of line of thinking. My second line, a very close second, is I just want to get somebody whose aesthetic is the aesthetic I want. You know, and that's what it really came down to for me. Like, I just want somebody who can make this thing come to life. If you white, if you're Asian, look, if you can make this thing come to life, I'm rocking with you right now. If there's something that you feel like you are incapable of doing in regard to this work, you got to be honest with me, because there's too much on the line. There's too much on the line, right? For me, there's too much on the line. But I knew once I saw Danica's rendering of their faces, I was good to go. I was good to go, because it's easy to mess this up, right? Once I saw their faces, I was like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? I'm good. I'm good. Jessica Love is one of the only other white illustrators that I really am like. Do you guys know Jessica Love?
Yeah.
Jessica Love, who
Julian
wrote,
is a mermaid.
oh
Yeah.
my God.
So good.
Oh my God. So
So-
good. So good. Okay.
Danica, what about you? Did you think about that in this process?
Oh yeah, I mean, from the beginning, I was like, why me? like, should I be like, why did they ask me to do this? Is it okay? Like, should I be working on this project? Should this go to somebody else? But I guess, you know, in the end, I figure if Jason wants me to do it, I'm not going to say no. Like, I'm going to say yes for sure. So, you know, I leave it up to Jason, and I kind of just tried to like base my illustrations on like what I know. And so I used my own neighborhood as the model for the neighborhood. And I used my friends and my neighbors as models for the characters. And, you know, I just tried to do my best to make this amazing, gorgeous book into the best thing I could. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask about, so we talked a little bit about violence, and I mean, obviously this is a book that's centered around like one act of violence and the potential for another one. So how is it different depicting that in prose or in poetry, and visually, like actually seeing blood and death? Like, does that change the readership of the story, or does it change the experience of the story?
That's interesting. What I will say is this. My mother, who loves this book, I gave her the graphic novel, and it was really painful for her to see it, because she's so close to it, and a lot of this stuff is rooted in real stuff. Like, some of this stuff is like based on true story of my own life and things that I've experienced and been through with my friends and stuff like that. And it was painful for her to see that moment of, you know, Sean Langner with, you know, shot. Like, that was really hard for her. And because it was hard for her, I knew that it was effective. I'm always careful about gratuitous violence, but I think there's something about. I think that Danica did a good job. I think in that moment it needed to be seen. In that moment, because the way it's written is Sean is shot and killed, right? It's shot, next page, and killed, right? There's that moment, and then it goes into like the weeping of the women in the community. It goes into the blood staining the concrete. It goes into the murder tape, the police do not cross tape being put up. It goes in, right? I really take a moment to really describe a murderous scene. And so to avoid it would have been a bit of a cop-out. You know, like, I leaned into it in the text, and so I'm glad that she took a swing. That's a tough thing to show. That's a tough thing to make, right? Same with the close-up of the gun. I was proud. I was like, Danica, I tip my hat to you for having enough nerve to say we're gonna just take a stark image of a gun in a country that is having a very complicated relation that has always had a complicated relationship with guns. We're gonna put it right on the, here it is, boom, this is it. This is the gun. Here are the names that we call this particular weapon. I thought those were really brazen and bold decisions that I think serve the narrative. If they didn't serve the narrative, then I would say, nah, this is too much, right? Sometimes people go too far and they get a little gratuitous and all becomes a bit masturbatory, right? But I thought she picked and she chose the right time to slap the reader in the face with that which is real and true. And I'm no complaints from me. I thought it was fantastic. Painful, yes, but the story is painful.
Yeah, I hate gratuitous violence more than anything. Like I'm okay with violence when it is serving a purpose and it's meaningful and it's important to show. But like if a book has like just way too much, I'll just like throw it across the room. But yeah, for me as an artist and writer, it's definitely harder for me to draw the violence just because I have to spend so much time with it. You know, it'll take me hours to draw a page, and so spending that much time with such a violent image is hard. But I think when I'm a reader, looking at a book, if I'm reading a text that is violent and heartbreaking, that'll bring me to tears just as much as an image will. So as a reader, I think it's both, either one can be extremely impactful.
All right, I have a couple more questions and then we'll take some audience questions. Just a reminder, if you have a question for Jason or Danica, you can drop it in the Q&A. We may not get to all of them, but you can also upvote questions that you think are good so that the good ones rise to the top and we make sure and ask those ones. So this is, I want to ask some like fun structure questions and stuff, but I also want to ask because, and Danica prompted me, she's like, we have to talk about this. Do you feel like this book reads differently this year, this moment, than it did when it first came out? Because there's such an increased awareness nationwide of the problems of racist policing and the problems of, violence and incarceration. I mean, obviously these are not new problems in any kind of way, but they're so like top of mind for America right now that I wonder if a book like this, does its relevance change, or does the way that we read it or look at it change?
And I think we have to be careful about who is the we you're addressing.
We. No, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Jason. I mean, we as all readers. I mean, does it change for young people? Does it change for teachers? Does it change for Black people, for white people?
It does not change for Black people. At least not for most of us. I don't speak for all Black people. We're not a monolith, right? So I'm very careful about that. But I can tell you that these are perennial issues. There's like a running joke about, it's a terrible joke, but there's a running joke that like, no matter what happens at 1600 Penn Avenue, Black people's lives don't change, right? Now that's not completely true, obviously, but that's a real thing that my mom has always said, my grandmama has always, that's like, it's a very real thing that there are things that have existed in our communities that don't shift or change because all of a sudden the masses of America or the whole of America has suddenly caught on to, just at least for a moment, have momentarily decided to check back in to a conversation we've been trying to have for hundreds of years, right? So for me, no, but I hope for someone, right? I hope there are, excuse my doorbell, I ordered, so I'm starving, so the food's coming. But for someone, for some young suburban kid, maybe for some white kid in Kansas who's never known this to be true, maybe for some wealthy kid who's never seen any of this stuff, despite his race or her race, maybe for an older white one, maybe for all the white teachers in the world, right? Who may be teaching diverse communities who don't quite understand what some of the things that young people are going through in their classes. I think for them, it may read a little differently, but for those kids who live in that neighborhood, it is what it is, it is what it is. If anything, it's confirmation and affirmation. It's another moment of visibility and emboldening of their lives. It is not meant to be something that they should read and say they should feel ashamed of themselves. They should read it and say, somebody knows I'm here. The kids in juvenile detention centers who the book is dedicated to, the book don't don't read no different to them because they still in jail. Like that's the reality. That's the reality. So for some people, sure. But for the people I wrote the book about, no.
That's a better answer than the question was. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to ask one more kind of structure question, and then we'll get to some audience questions. I want to talk about, so a long way down, it means a lot of things in this novel, but it literally, there are the 7 floors that the elevator goes down. And those 7 floors in the verse novel are kind of are a structure, and in the graphic novel create a structure as well. So can I ask both of you, did that structure, how did you work with that creatively? Did it help? Was it confining? What was your experience of working with those 7 floors? Danica, maybe you can start because you didn't create the 7 floors. You
Right.
just had to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of really about the people that got on at each floor. So I thought of it as like Buck's chapter, and then Danny's chapter, and then Uncle Mark's chapter, and so forth. And that kind of also structured it around the loss in Will's life. So that I just thought of that as like Will's life and like the holes that were made in his life by losing each of these people. So, it's like each time the elevator doors open, that's like a hole in it and then there's that person there. So, and then obviously I wanted some kind of marker in the, like visual marker in the book to show each floor and separate each kind of chapter. And so then there's, I wanted this kind of repeated image of the elevator wall with the button panel and the floor number lit up, just to kind of give us like an expectant pause while we're waiting for the next person to get on and the next thing to be revealed. So, and I think it's just the novel is just so brilliantly written. You just feel like each person that gets in is increasingly more deeply connected to Will's life. Like it's kind of like concentric circles. Like the first person who gets in, he doesn't even recognize it first, and the second person as well. And then it's his uncle, and then it's his, then it's his dad. But it's so brilliant because then the second to last person who gets in is this total stranger, and it throws everything off, and you're like, whoa. It's like concentric circles with like a surprise lightning bolt.
Sure. Yeah, that's hilarious. And also true. Like I really got to that point in the book and was like, need something to shake it up. Yeah, I was like, let's throw this. Introducing this guy, right? A random stranger that no one knows, but is super integral to the story, right? Like, I think for me, it's the same. I think I use those floors as, I mean, look, there is so much of this book was about figuring out scope, right? Scope. And what does that mean? That means I had to figure out what was the amount of time, what was the space that Will was going to be living in, and where was the story going to take place? And it was all going to happen in this shack of an elevator. And because I knew that, then I had to figure out what my devices were going to be in order to make this thing work, right? So I knew I could use time, the timestamp, and I knew I could use the elevator floors instead of chapters, and I could work backward and do it that way. And it was just a really smart, at least I think so, a smart literary device that didn't feel trite, because I think sometimes literary devices sometimes writers lean on the device, and then it becomes sort of cliche and a bit hackneyed. And I wanted it to be like, no, there's a reason that I'm using these floors. There's a reason they're serving as chapters and floors and organizers, right? All of that, as well as like, but it felt so, I wanted it to feel super fluid at the same time. And so it was one of those rare moments where everything kind of, all the stars kind of align.
It works. It really works. Obviously, for lots and lots of people. So we've got like maybe 75 people in the event right now. We've got a whole bunch of questions. I know there's a lot of students here. We sent out a big ask to students, so we have a lot of really good questions, and people have been upvoting them. So we're going to start with the ones that have the most votes, and see what you guys think of them. So the first one is from Janessa. And this, I have to say, spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't read the book, like please cover your ears because you're going to know. So Janessa asks, throughout the book, Will was seeing people he knew, but they were dead. So in the sense, were you giving your readers hints that Will had died, seeing ghosts, or was it all in his head?
I'll never answer. That's a question I refuse to answer. Sorry, buddy, but I made a vow when I wrote this book that I would never, ever, ever give away anything that could allude to the ending of this story. Because if you are a young person, my job is to lead you to the point, to the end, and then push you to activate your imaginations. All the information is there, and you get to make this decision. Maybe he's dead, maybe he's not, maybe he's gets off the elevator, maybe he stays on. I don't know. That's up to you. But all the information is there for you to, and any choice you make, all the information is there to prove that to be true. No matter what you say, it's all there to prove it to be true. Every single scenario, the evidence is there to support it, right? I intentionally wrote the book that way, but I can't give away what I think, because I'll be robbing you of your sort of imaginative freedom, and that's not my job. And for the adults in the room, I ain't telling y'all either, because a lot of y'all are teachers, and I want you to mind your own consciousness. If you chose his death, if you chose to kill a kid, and you had a choice to not kill him, and you teach children every day, then you should probably ask yourself why. And that's not an indictment. I'm just being honest with you, like.
Fair, yeah. Well, actually, the next question is from a teacher. Her name is Nadia, and she says, I'm a teacher, and I want to know what a teacher did well to encourage you and what one could have done differently.
The greatest teacher I ever had, his name was Chris Williams. He's still a very good friend of mine. He just retired last year. High school, he taught me a senior in high school, the best teacher ever. And the one thing he did is he taught me how to be human. What does that mean? Well, one day he went out and bought a fish, and he put the fish in the tank in our class, and he made us name the fish. And he said, the only rule is none of you knuckleheads can touch the fish. Don't put your fingers in the tank. If your fingers touch this fish, you're suspended for 2 days. And, we're all like, whatever, we're 16, 17, who cares? Like, whatever. And then a month goes by, and we feed the fish every day. We've named the fish, all this, that, and the third. And one day he comes to class, and he takes the fish out of the tank, and he puts it on the floor. And the fish starts to flap around, and it's suffocating, it's gasping for air. And two young ladies run over, and they pick the fish up, and they throw it back in the tank, and they save the fish's life. And he tells them to get their book bags and go to the principal's office, because they're suspended for 2 days, because the rules are the rules. He said, don't touch the fish, they touch the fish. He said no questions asked, non-negotiable. If you touch the fish, you're suspended for 2 days. They touched the fish, and so they got suspended for 2 days. And they were screaming, and they were angry. And as they left the class, he stuck his head out the door, and he said, well, hold your heads up, because you did the right thing. But sometimes doing the right thing has consequences. And the rest of us had to sit there in our shame and our cowardice. And not only that, I also had to think about the fact that for the rest of my life, I would have to pay attention to the women who save us every single day. So that is the teacher that has done the most for me to encourage me and inspire me every day. I do what I do with him in mind every day. I risk my life every day. I say the things every day because of that man. The teachers who were not that inspiring were pretty much all the other teachers I've ever had. So no. But there were a few that were really rough on me. I had a college professor who told me that my poetry was stank, and that the literary canon did not deserve to be expanded. There were no Black people deserved to be in the canon, not Toni Morrison, not Alice Walker, not Langston Hughes, not Zora Neale Hurston, nobody, like I went through all of that nonsense, but they're not worth mentioning. So.
Wow. Yeah. I'm glad we're recording this so we can go back and watch it later. You guys keep that in mind. All right. The next question up is from Des. And this one might be more of a question for Danica. Des is asking, were there any scenes or portions of the book that was removed during the editing process from the final graphic novel? And if yes, why? You talked about this a little bit, but maybe you can talk more specifically about some of the things that had to get left out.
Things left out from the novel or from
the graphic novel? Things from the novel that had to get left out of the graphic novel.
There were parts that got left out, but there were never any scenes, like entire scenes that got left out, I don't think. But I don't know, Jason. I'm trying to remember. Like,
I don't think so. I think it's all there.
trim here and there, but not leave anything out entirely because I wanted it to keep the entire structure and like the whole feeling of the entire book.
Yeah.
So, you know, I tried to like just trim it down here and there, but keep it more like the original vision of the book as much as possible.
Oh, wait,
Uh,
somebody said, hold on a second. Somebody said, I thought the question was more, did you draw anything that didn't feel right and had to be scrapped or done over?
I certainly redid a lot of pages. Like if I didn't get it quite right, you know, watercolor, I love it because it's sort of loose and a little bit unpredictable. And that's kind of why it was so good for this book, because you can do these sort of ghostly images. But the unpredictability also means that sometimes you just mess up. And you have to be like, you know what, this one looks weird. This one looks faces, you know, faces are so hard. Like if you get something just a little bit off, it just, you're like, okay, this person looks weird now. It doesn't look like the right character. You know, it looks like, you know, you can't tell who it is from panel to panel. So I definitely had to redo a lot of the pages, but I didn't throw anything away completely.
This is a related one. We'll skip around just a little bit. Raina asks, how long did it take Danica to illustrate the book? And Raina also adds, love that she shared that painting the violent sections were more draining.
Yeah, I think it took about 2 years, maybe a little bit more. And yeah, painting the violent sections, especially like the kids, like it was just so heartbreaking to have to labor over images of kids getting hurt, you know. So, and also, you know, I used friends as models for a lot of the characters, and I don't know why I didn't think this through before taking their photos and like drawing their character sketches and stuff. But then I got into the middle of the book and I was like, wait a minute, like I can't draw my friends getting hurt. Like I was like, oh no. So, you know, I tried to like Sean was not directly based on anyone I know. He's kind of like an adaptation of, you know, a model who modeled for me that I was not a close friend, you know, wasn't a friend of mine. But then I tried to like, again, avoiding gratuitous violence as much as possible. Like if I didn't have to show the violence on the page, you know, why?
Exactly.
Okay, here's a question from Habon. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. They ask, why did Jason decide free verse was the best form to write this book in?
Because first of all, the original version of this book is written in prose. So the original draft of Long Way Down is a straightforward novel. I turned it into my agent, and she said, "Hey, man, I don't know if you're going to be able to convince people that this whole story takes place in a minute, if it takes them 3 weeks to read it." You know, and so that was the first thing. I was like, oh, okay, let me work on this. And then I was like, okay, I was trained as a poet. That was my sort of skills. That was my original skill set. So that's what my training is in, this poetry. So let me go back to my first love and tap into some of those devices and things that I learned back in the day. And then I realized, I got to write something that I make sure that eliminates all possibility for someone to not read it. Right. So like I needed to make sure that the young people who, no matter where you lived, that you could read it, no matter what your literacy level was, that you could read it. For my youngins locked in prison, that they could read it. For my my ESL students, that they could read it. Right. I was literally thinking about like, how can I make something that could be read by everybody, despite all the nonsense that this country and that our sort of, you know, all the things that get in the way of who we are in education, create these interesting stratifications of our abilities, right? Whether it be like, I'm new to the country, so I can't necessarily, I'm learning English. Cool, I got something for you. I have been under-resourced, no fault of my own. And so my literacy level isn't where the school says it should be. Cool, I got something for you. Right? I am in prison and I want something I can relate to. Cool, I got something for you. Like everything. I wanted to think of all those things. And then lastly, I wanted to write it in a way where you could tap into the tension a little easier. And doing that with verses, just like it's built for that. The poets know how to manipulate the mind of the reader. right? Poets know that I'm a Hitchcock fan, and I think about poetry like I think about Hitchcock films. Hitchcock understood that you don't have to actually ever say the thing to create this. You don't have to show it. You don't have to show blood to create discomfort, right? You could just tilt the camera a little bit and create just a slight off-centeredness on the frame, and the people watching the movie will be uncomfortable and not know why, right? So that's the reason you see like the word sort of one word down here or one word up here, or like, because it causes dissonance in the mind, the psyche of the reader. Like those are the things that I was thinking about that you can only do when you have less words on a page.
It's interesting because from the very first graphic novel I made, I studied Hitchcock like frame by frame to see like what are the camera angles that are making this emotionally charged, and like how do I copy these compositions? And yeah, so
It's real. Yo, the birds, if you watch the birds, it's wild because he'll show like one bird. There's nothing frightening about a single bird, right? And then the camera will like cut to the right, and then it'll cut back and there's like three birds, right? It's genius. It's genius, you know? Like those are the things that I think the poets do, you know, and obviously the artists, you know.
All right, I want to give a shout out to a couple people in the chat who are asking a lot of questions. So I want to make sure they get some answered. Mia's got some questions about who inspired the characters. They're inspired by people you knew, like what was the hardest part to write. But then I love that Mia points out, she says, Jesse wants to know if this story has ever happened to Jason as a Black man. He keeps on putting it in the chat, and I don't know if you can see it. So bless you, Mia, first of all.
Yeah,
But,
Jesse.
yeah.
All right, so me and Jesse. Also, shout out to all the Suzanne Leaks. There's a whole bunch of Suzanne Leak students in here, so shout out to all her youngest. So yeah, this is based on something that happened to me. I mean, look, I was a 19-year-old. I lost friends when I was young. You know, I lost some friends. I lost family members. I mean, it's a part of life for some of us. And when I was 19, I lost a close friend. And for all of you out there who read the track series, the kid that Sonny was based on is the same kid that Sean is based on in Long Way Down in real life. His name was Randall Duncan. He's a very close friend of mine, and he was murdered when we were 19 years old. And in that moment, my friend and all of us, we went to his mom's house, and we told his mom, hey man, don't worry about it. We think we know who did it, and we'll figure it out and we'll take care of it, because that's the way we were raised. The neighborhood created a space for us to live by certain codes. No crying, no snitching, and you always sort of exact revenge on the person who took the life of one of your friends or family members. And the reason it was this way, just to give you some context, because people always say, well, why would you live by such Wild West rules? The reason that so many of us felt this way is because we could never depend on police officers to even bother to try to figure out what happened, which they didn't, by the way. It's a cold case. Been a cold case for 20 years, right? And so because we couldn't depend on police officers to care enough about our bodies in the street, we took it upon ourselves to make justice. His mother blocked the door and begged us to let it go. And because we respected his mother, we let it go. And I'm glad we did, because maybe I wouldn't be standing here today. But the truth of the matter is, I know what that anger feels like. I know for a fact that in that moment, as a young 19-year-old boy, I could have taken a life and slept like a baby. And that's a complicated and uncomfortable thing for many people to hear, but it's human. Some of you have children, and you know that there's a part of you you have never met, but you will meet if anything, God forbid, happens to your child, right? It's a human thing. We have a hard time talking about anger in this country, but it's real. I'm human. I'm not going to pretend like it's not there. I've learned to manage it. I've learned to not let it eat me alive. I've learned to not let it affect the people around me or harm people, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not there, a real anger. And there are young people in our world who know what that anger feels like. And so that's where all of this story, and what I wanted to do was honor those young people and honor their anger, while also telling the story to show that there are decisions to be made. And that's just the reality. It don't always feel good to hear it, but that's the truth.
All right, we got a lot of people trying to ask what happened at the end, and some of them knowing that you're not going to answer it. But this one's a tricky one, and I want to shout out to Carmen, who also has lots of good questions. But Carmen asks, if you could change the ending of the book, how would you have written it?
No, some books, every now and then, this is I'm a person who pretty much struggles with everything that I make. You know, I write books and never read them like a lot of artists. That's what we kind of, it's like, I live in a space of insecurity. It's hard to do this kind of job. But this book is one of the rare books where I wouldn't change a thing.
I feel bad like moving on from that moment because that's a real good moment. Here's another question from Ben. Ben asked, Jason, how has the experience of being the ambassador been during COVID? Has it been hard to reach people and make connection? And how do you feel like people have been adapting to connect about literature?
It's tough. It's tough, but it's been okay. I think young people are resilient. And so I have to match their resilience with my own. It's exhausting. It's funny. We spend so much of our time in the Black Mirror, right? Like in these screens, and you don't really realize how draining it is until you have to spend your time in the screens, you know? And now I'm like, it's exhausting. I mean, Zooming every day is rough, but it has still been effective in connecting with young people. It takes a lot more engagement. Everybody got to kind of want to be there, right? You got to want to be there for it to work, because I'm not in your face laughing and joking with you. I'm not, the jokes don't land the same. This small screen that between us, it filters, it waters the jokes down, right? You got to really be leaning in to like feel everything, right? But I think ultimately I've done right, all the videos for that, and all the teachers are using it, and it's wonderful to see it working, right? I've done brain yoga, and that's been so much fun to have young people just tap into their imaginations. I've done newsletters every month. I'm working on actually producing brain yoga, the actual manufactured card game, within the next month or so. That'll be out, and I'll be able to get people the game so they can play it and have it for themselves. It's been okay. It's been okay. Ultimately, we will get through it, and I will continue to work as hard as I can, and hopefully young folks will meet me where we are, and we'll make it work. I don't have a choice, you know? And the silver lining, by the way, because there is a silver lining here, the silver lining is it democratizes the idea for something like this. If we weren't in COVID right now, Danica and I would probably be having this talk in New York. Right. But the fact is that because we're in COVID, the whole world, if they so choose, could log on and be here for this. Right. I could do it. Me and Danica could do a talk with two people from Asia who specialize in a certain thing, and we could do that, and that could be a thing that could happen through the internet in a way that it may not have been able to happen if COVID wasn't a thing, right? So there are some silver linings that I'm trying to lean into.
It's true. It's been a great thing for accessibility, which we really appreciate. All right, we are almost at closing time, but I wondered, before we end, are there any questions that you, Danica, and Jason would like to ask each other? I know, putting you on the spot, sorry.
Let me think. Probably, you know, I think if my questions are always selfish questions, you know, like if something were to happen 10 years from now, and there's some other book that happened to be great, I don't know if that's ever gonna happen. Long Way Down will never be there. That's not gonna happen again. But you know, if I called you and said, Danica, look, I just think this is another one of those times, would you be game? Would you at least think about it?
Anytime. Is there anything you're working on next that you can give us a hint about?
Yeah, I'm working on two things. I'm working on a book for like, it's like that early reader space, like a younger middle grade space, about a kid obsessed with being a stunt boy. His parents are going through a divorce, and he's trying to save his parents from themselves by doing the stunts for them. And I love it. So it's super sweet. It's called Stunt Boy in the Meantime. I'm working on that. And then I'm working on an adult novel about a boy born without a mouth. And that's called The Mouthless God and Jesus #2. And that's going to come out in 2022. So there's work happening. So much work.
Titles.
Thanks. Thank you.
That's awesome. There's lots to look forward to. Well, thank you guys for spending this time with us tonight. We really, really appreciate it. And for everybody who's here, if you missed anything or if you just want to watch this again, we'll be posting the recording to our YouTube channel. So look out for it at Greenlight Bookstore. And don't forget to get your copy of A Long Way Down in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. And I just want to say just a personal thanks to both of you because you've both been such wonderful, substantial supporters of independent bookstores. And that means so much to us. So it's really special to be able to hang out with you and talk about this beautiful, amazing book. So thank you all
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you. Shout out to Brooklyn. We love y'all, man. Thank you.